And welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. With us today, Blair Nosanwisch, a rabbinical student at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and you are here with us to speak about Parshat Miketz. So hello and thank you for coming. A few words about the Parsha. It's mostly about Joseph. Joseph gets out of prison to solve the Pharaoh's dreams. He interprets the dreams to mean that 7 years of plenty will be followed by 7 years of hunger. Pharaoh appoints Joseph governor of Egypt. 10 of his brothers, that is Joseph's brothers, come to Egypt to purchase grain. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they do not recognize him. He accuses them of being spies and insists that they bring Benjamin to prove that they are who they are or who they say they are. Jacob reluctantly agrees to send Benjamin only after Judah assumes personal and eternal responsibility for him. The Parsha begins with this pasuk, Vayhi miketz shnatayim yamim uFar'o cholem ve'hineh omed al ha'yeor. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh was dreaming, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. Let's talk about Joseph. He is a miserable young prisoner with a special talent to interpret dreams, and suddenly he becomes the governor of Egypt. Does it make any sense?
Remarkable.
Yeah, any sense at all?
Yeah, I think in order to understand how Joseph becomes this figure who really, he lives out his life in this role of the second in command of Egypt. So
And an empire at the time, it's not just a secondary country. This is the empire of the region.
right, I've heard it said you could think of him as the second most powerful person in the world.
Right.
Especially with what comes to pass with the famines and the importance of Egypt's role in solving this this sort of social economic problem. So I actually think, I feel very convinced by the argument that this scholar, John Levinson, makes in a book that I was reading because of some research about Isaac and Akedat Yitzchak. So he actually would start the story sooner and say it's not just that Joseph rises to power, but that the rise is precipitated by multiple cycles of falling and rising. And that Joseph's story is just the latest and kind of the perfection of this narrative that we have throughout Genesis of the second or the not the Bechor, not the first, being the chosen one, and how complex that fate of chosenness is and how it sort of works in their life. So he says Joseph's rise from the prison is actually, we've seen already a rise from the pit.
Right.
And then we see a rise. And then the second descent is the symbolic descent to Egypt. From the pit to Egypt, into Potiphar's house, where he is then rises to being second in command in Potiphar's house. And the way that he's sort of described in that second ascent really mirrors what happens in the third ascent into Pharaoh's service, because in both cases, he's sort of entrusted with this incredible amount of power and responsibility. And what I see that's so compelling is actually the sort of solving of the problem of this younger brother who in the beginning of his life seems to be very headstrong and very he seems very headstrong and almost power hungry in the first dream sequence that we have of him. And by the third rise, he's attributing his success to God, not to his own merit. And also, he has experienced the sort of capriciousness of life and of existence. And he's gone through these multiple cycles of falling and rising.
And so, we see that when he has his relations with his brothers are not great relations, and he seems, an unlikable person who doesn't get along with other people. And then he suddenly becomes this person who has this almost magic power over other people, whether it's Potiphar or the wife of Potiphar or the people with whom he spends time at the prison or the Pharaoh himself.
Yeah. Yes, and I love what you're saying. And I push back a little and say, I think we also know people like this in our own lives who have such magnetism and such charisma that you kind of love them and you kind of hate them. And I feel like Joseph's story is actually very consistent in that his father loves him and is drawn to him, and also can't really figure out how to manage his special quality, because it's a problem. In as much as it's powerful and draws his father in, it also is a problem in the family. And it's a problem between the brothers. And the sort of image that we get from the life of Joseph, at least by this point, is it's a problem that can only be solved by the events that come to pass, by his being brought low by life, and also continually sort of escaping that low place through the grace of God, or through the grace of all of these talents and charismas that he's been gifted by God.
Right. As you speak, I'm just thinking out loud, if Joseph would have become a leader in our modern democratic society, does he have it? Maybe he has this sort of charisma that is needed in democratic societies.
So I love the question. I'm curious what you think. And yeah, do you want to go first? What you think?
Oh, would he become a leader in our times? I think he would.
It'd be good if he became a leader.
I think he would become a leader. An unlikable person with the people closest to him, but very, has this strong will and charisma with other people. I think this works.
Yeah, I also think that the arc of his coming into his power is as much about him becoming a leader as it is about him becoming a responsible leader, which is to say, or another word for it is a servant leader, that he manages to acquire great power and influence. And the picture that we have is as someone who uses that responsibly and not just for his own gain. Part of the idea, the big story happening here is this is also the story of the Jews and the Jews as the chosen people. And what does it mean to have a story of a special kind of status? How is that both a problem and also a responsibility that you can, in theory, grow into? But it's not a given in Joseph's chosenness that he will be a good leader.
I always wondered about the fact that our parsha ends with a cliffhanger. Is this a kind of weird sense of humor on the part of the people who divided the Torah by parshas, or is there any meaning to it? Why do they have this suspenseful moment in which we stop and we don't know what's going to happen with Joseph and the brothers?
Yeah. Well, I was actually struck that you said that he doesn't get along with his brothers and that is his condition, is that those close to him don't like him. I think I see it differently. I see his personal story being one of having to resolve those differences with his family. And I think the cliffhanger, to me, is on the one side of the cliffhanger, our parsha, you're not sure if he's going to manage to reconcile with his brothers. And on the other side, we see that reconciliation. But it's a reconciliation that's tempered by his sort of acquiring this otherworldly, I mean, I'm thinking of the show The Crown and this depiction of the office and how the office kind of takes over the person.
Right.
And it's like at the end of this narrative, his brothers are bowing to Joseph as the vizier of Egypt and not as their brother. But it's also inseparable from him being their brother.
Right. And we mentioned the fact that, you know, it's an interesting thought to wonder whether Joseph would be a leader in our modern times. He could clearly be a character in a great TV series.
Yeah. Yes. Definitely.
Like,
and I also think I'm so struck by the story of Judah that it's not in our parsha, but it was last.
Well, Judah begins to rise in our parsha when he steps up and tells Jacob that he will take responsibility for Benjamin. So
right.
It also begins in our parsha.
Right. And it's like part of this narrative of how the siblings are dealing with their unique or regular status. And it's like Judah sort of steps up. I like the reality is that both Judah and Joseph become the lineages of our leadership, our kingship. In a sense, both of those characters have to go through the disappointment, the suffering of life, and also experience like stepping into leadership and responsibility from inside of those experiences of suffering and of being brought low. And Judah, that narrative that we have of him and Tamar, and of him losing his sons, which the Torah doesn't dwell on that as suffering, but I think the fact that he's so reluctant to give his third son away to Tamar, and that he goes to such great lengths and really like denies a mitzvah that he's supposed to fulfill, that gives us the sense that he's really suffering from the loss of those two sons. And so it's really striking how Reuven offers his two sons to Jacob as if that's going to solve this problem of losing and of sons who are lost. And instead it's Judah who's learned this lesson of suffering, who's able to say, I'm not going to offer more death, more suffering. I'm going to say, I will do everything in my power to make this right. And I will take that personal responsibility upon myself. And that really becomes, I think, a tikkun within our story.
Well, you offered so much nuance that I think our listeners and viewers must go and read Parshat Miketz now, because otherwise they will not get all of it. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for your time, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.